Welcome to the week 4 go-to session. This is the final session of the month. And hold on 2 seconds because I actually have the wrong presentation open. There we go. Okay, again, welcome to the final go-to session of the month. This will mostly focus on what you need to do for this week, the actual essay. So I'm going to give some tips on how to do that. We'll also cover the final aspect of APA that we haven't gotten to yet, which is what do you do when you actually quote something directly within the text of your essay or make reference to a specific fact or statistic. So I'll cover that as well. Okay, but yeah, it's essay time. So week 4 is really just devoted to, if you've done a good job with your brief, you've already received feedback from me. If your brief is in pretty solid shape, you're ready to make the next step and turn it into an essay. So this session is going to cover some of that. Here's the agenda. I want to briefly talk about editing versus revising. Excuse me. I want to talk a little bit about how to write introduction paragraphs because I have some quick tips to give you. And then I'll quickly just kind of show how we're going to take your brief and turn it into an essay, or as I like to say, how we're going to take that skeleton and actually hang some flesh on it. I want to cover in-text citation, make some quick reminders, and then we'll leave some time for some questions and answers. Okay, quickly, editing versus revising. I have 2 pictures here on the screen that sort of show the difference. Okay, editing, as referenced by this picture of a woman typing on her keyboard, typically refers to the smaller stuff. When you hear the term editing, it usually means things like proofreading, making sure that punctuation is correct, all the kind of small stuff, which is definitely important. You certainly want to give your essay a good, thorough run through, either on your own. Making use, I'm amazed how many students forget this, but making use of the grammar checker in whatever word processing program that you're doing. All that stuff is important, but equally important is the idea of revising, which is what I'm trying to capture here on the picture on the right, which sort of looks like Sauron from the Lord of the Rings movies, right? You can see that the word vision is contained in the word revising. It means seeing things anew. And this is important because you got feedback from me on your brief, but you also got feedback from your classmates. So hopefully you've kind of soaked up everything that people have said to you, but take that stuff seriously into account, because maybe you don't have to just focus on editing. Maybe you do need to revision your topic or your project a little bit. Maybe something that I said or something one of your classmates said made you rethink things. Maybe your thesis needs tweaking. Maybe one of your reasons wasn't as solid. Remember, you had to come up with 3 reasons to kind of support your position. If one of those needs revising, you should be doing so. So keep this in mind, okay? Because lots of times students get caught up on the small stuff, like, oh, I just need to fix little things here and there. But really, when we're taking it to the essay stage, we need to be revising as well, seeing things anew. Okay. The essay. Here's like a basic organization of an essay. Most of this, a lot of you probably know. If you don't, you might take a screenshot of this. I guess you could write it down, but it's kind of a lot to write down. So if you don't know how to take a screenshot, you might figure out how to do that. If you have your MacBook, I think it's Command-Shift-3. But here's like the basic structure of an essay. There will be an introduction paragraph, okay? And I'm going to get into more details about this in just a second. But in the introduction, we try to find an engaging way to begin. We define the issue briefly, okay? Briefly, because you're actually going to save the meat, the specific details for the body of your paper. And then the introduction ends with your thesis, okay? Typically, that's where the thesis appears. The good news is, again, if you've been keeping up with these activities week to week, especially the brief that you wrote, if you already created a thesis that more or less got my approval and seemed to pass the litmus test of your classmates' perusal as well, you already have your thesis, okay? But that's going to go at the end of your introduction. Why? Because typically we expect the introduction to work that way, that it grabs us, it defines the issue, and then it leaves us with the sort of the key thing that you're going to spend the rest of the essay covering. It sets up your reader for what's about to be discussed. And then really, if this seems too sparrow, I apologize, but it really is as simple as taking that basic information from your brief and turning it into essay form. So if you already established 3 solid reasons in your brief, it's just a matter of creating a paragraph for each of those reasons. So whatever your reason number 1 is, it will probably be a single paragraph. It could be more if you really have, I don't know, so much information that it's worth 2 paragraphs that focus on slightly different aspects. That's fine. For a lot of you, it will probably be a single paragraph. Most of the comments should be your own. Okay, so you're using your own words to explain things. But probably at some point in the paragraph, a fact, a small piece of research, a short quotation can be embedded for support. Research is important because if not, then the paper can kind of come across as, the world according to Joe A. student. And that's not what we want. We want to hear your voice to a certain degree, but backing up what you say occasionally with research or support or quotations helps just solidify the points you're going to make. And you're going to do the same thing with your other reasons, right? If you had 3 clear reasons, look, 3 paragraphs. That's why having a really solid brief in place was really important, because once you have all those things, you've identified your problem clearly. You've written a pretty succinct thesis. You have 3 pretty good reasons, and you've already looked into evidence for each of those. You're all set to go. Okay, 1 paragraph each. You hopefully already have the research at your fingertips because you had to supply evidence for each of those reasons in the brief. So it's really just about writing the thing. And finally, there should be a conclusion. This is where you'll present your solution with more depth than you did in your thesis, and you'll just find a satisfying way to end the paper. So we're looking really at about 5 paragraphs. Might be 6, might be 7, but for a lot of you, it'll probably be 5. An introduction, your 3 reasons, 1 paragraph each, with some research tucked in convenient places, and then a conclusion. Okay? Let's talk a little bit about introductions, as captured here by the handshake greeting. As I kind of just said on the last slide, introductions do 3 things, right? They briefly define the issue at hand. They end with a clear thesis statement. And ideally, they should find an engaging way to grab the reader's attention. Now, if you've taken an English class before in high school or even at another college, you might know some of these tricks. I call them hooks to grab the reader. Anybody remember what any of those could possibly be? You can type your answers in the chat. Like, do you remember some of those tips you learned in a previous English class? Like, what's a good way to sort of begin your paper or create reader interest, or to find a natural way to sort of lead into your larger topic? Anybody remember any of those tips? Quentin says he has nothing. Okay. Anybody else? It's okay if you don't, I guess, because that means the information I'll give you is hopefully useful. Lots of times students do know a trick or 2. Okay, well, here they are. Here are some of them, and hopefully these should sort of remind you. Like, you'll look at these and go, oh yeah, I've heard these before. Like, we can begin with an example or anecdote. It can be an example that's researched, or it can be personal. Okay, so maybe there's something going on in the news right now. Remember, all month I've been using this example of royalty rates paid out by streaming music services to artists. Right? It seems like every article that's out there right now on Spotify begins with the same example or anecdote, right? Taylor Swift pulling her music from Spotify. So technically, that's an opening move. They're going to use Taylor Swift to sort of highlight this larger issue so they can talk about it more in depth. Other techniques begin with a thoughtful question, begin with a powerful quotation, begin with a dramatic or descriptive hypothetical scene. That's sort of like an imagine this scenario. You sort of paint things with the same level of detail of a real example. It's just it's a little bit fictional because it's hypothetical. Or you can begin with an insightful or surprising big picture or fact. Does some of this sound familiar now? Hopefully this isn't entirely from left field. Let me say that all these are great ways to begin your paper, right? They're all terrific opening moves, but not if you use them generically. Like, there's nothing worse than beginning with a question that you're not interested in asking and the reader isn't interested in answering. So, for example, if I started an essay with "What is music?" And use that, what is music? Uh, Streaming music companies, blah blah blah, have been under fire recently. Like that's not a really engaging way to begin. That's just you dropping in a generic question. So all these techniques are awesome, and you should try whichever one fits best. And I'll give some examples in just a second, so you can see this in kind of real time. But they become lousy techniques if you just use them generically. There's nothing duller than a question just being dropped in out of nowhere or a quotation dropped in. Um, so you have to be using these techniques with a sort of strategy in mind. Okay. But these are techniques for grabbing the reader's attention. So here's an example. Okay. And we're going to go back to my topic that I've been using all month with streaming music companies and royalties. And I'm going to quickly read this out loud. In 2011, pop star Lady Gaga was paid $167 for 1 million plays of her 2008 hit Poker Face via Spotify. Okay, so there's my hook, right? And actually, this is a combination of techniques. It's both an example, right? It's a real example. And yet it's also citing facts. So it's kind of falling into two of those categories. It's an example and it's a sort of surprising fact. So anyway, she's paid $167. Yes, that is correct, $167. And then I give a brief overview of the problem. Okay, I'm going to save the bigger details for the body of the paper, but it's important that I use my opening hook to sort of transition into the topic I want to deal with. So I write, this shockingly low figure highlights an important problem, namely the low royalty rates that streaming music services pay out to artists. Digital music in all its forms is certainly the future of music, and streaming sites like Spotify and Pandora offer attractive options for consumers. But artists are struggling to survive in the current environment. The streaming music companies argue that they cannot pay more and are already operating at a deficit. But there is a solution that consumers can follow to help artists and to increase sluggish music sales. And then my thesis. Right? While free streaming music accounts are attractive, music fans should consider paying the reasonable monthly subscription fees offered by these sites because everybody will benefit. Okay, so there's the gist of it. My hook, a brief overview of the problem so people know what I'm talking about, my thesis, and then I'll save the bulk of it for the body of my paper. I'll take those 3 reasons that I created in my brief, create separate paragraphs for each of those reasons. I'll go into more detail about my solution in the conclusion, and boom, I have an essay. Okay? Let's look at another example. This was written by a game design student here at the Los Angeles Film School. I don't get as many video game people in our sections, but the LA Film School does have a program in gaming. We're not going to read this entire thing out loud. Let's see how big I can make this. Well, that's way too big. Okay. This is about video game violence, right? The kind of violent content that's in video games. But look at his technique here. Here's his opening move. Your child is a murderer. Last night he killed 12 people in cold blood, including a stripper and 4 cops in San Andreas. You were a good parent, but it wasn't enough. The cops took him down in the end. He was only 12 years old. How could this tragedy have been prevented? Now, here's a quick fact check. I don't know how many people here play games. Is anybody aware of the trick that's being used here? Anybody catch on what the writer is referring to? Nobody nobody gets the references. Am I the only incredibly irresponsible adult who plays games? Yeah, Montana, it's a video game. I'm surprised nobody knows which game it is though. But anyway, I'll spill the beans in just a second. But notice the technique, right? It's kind of that hypothetical. Imagine this scenario, and look how shocking it is. Your child is a murderer. Last night he killed 12 people in cold blood, right? It makes you want to keep reading. Okay, Quentin and Taylor caught on. Yes, it's Grand Theft Auto. But it's cool because if you're familiar with this series, you catch on pretty quickly what the trick is. It's kind of this imagine this scenario, but it's also reality based because he is describing the world of a video game. But if you're not aware of that, it's still successful because you keep reading thinking, wow, what is this? Some 12-year-old was out killing people, killing a stripper and 4 cops. What's going on here? And then eventually you catch on, right? As an avid video gamer and a student of game development at the Los Angeles Film School. And then we get his thesis. I urge parents to be involved with the games children are playing. Parents should be knowledgeable about ratings and have an open dialogue with their children. Actually, that's a pretty good solution as well, because this is just me. There are other instructors who are teaching different sections of this course, the same activities, the same assignments. But I really push for like practical, feasible solutions. And I like this because, listen, we're not going to suddenly ban video games. We're not going to suddenly tell Rockstar, which is the producer of these games, that they can no longer make these titles. But a practical solution seems to encourage parents to, be more responsible, pay attention to ratings. If the game isn't appropriate, don't buy it for your child. Speak with your children, all that kind of stuff. But anyway, the point here is that this is also following the sort of classic moves that an introduction can make. He makes his sort of stylish opening, and he translates into the topic itself, right? Video games, and then he delivers his thesis. Okay, so that's what you're going for. So one of the things you might think about right now is, what sort of move are you going to make in your introduction? I'm trying to remember some of your topic. Quentin's working on the same topic that I've been using as an example all month: royalty rates. Taylor's doing a cloud-based solution for animation companies. Montana's doing something with the different options artists have when it comes to choosing a path for a record deal. So what move are you going to make in your introduction? Still following these basic guidelines. Grab the reader, define the issue briefly, deliver your thesis. Okay, moving on. Okay, this actually should have appeared earlier. Okay, just a reminder that, yeah, you're taking your brief, right? And you're sort of you have the skeleton, which is what's captured in this picture here with the frame of the house. And if that skeleton is pretty solid, you can now hang meat on it, which sounds actually kind of gross when I hear myself say that. But you get the gist, right? We're going to make this skeleton into flesh. And if your brief is in pretty good shape, you can then add all the elements to your structure, like a nice little roof and a door and windows and all that. But it really is as simple as taking that basic information and turning it into an essay. And I'm covering introductions because I think that's the kind of the part that we haven't discussed that probably needed a little bit of insight. But otherwise, it's just a matter of taking each of those reasons and making sure that you're devoting a paragraph each to them. And there's that reminder of that, okay? Introduction, reason number 1 gets a paragraph, reason number 2 gets a paragraph, reason number 3 gets a paragraph. In your conclusion, you'll explore the solution and bring the essay to a close. And a little bit later, I'll show you where you can see some samples, some more student samples, so you can see this in action in case you're still confused or in case you want to see how it actually plays out. But there is the basic structure. Quick reminder, audience, have one, okay? I mean, your thesis should pretty much define that already. Most of your topics are so big that you can't really address everyone everywhere. You're usually addressing someone quite specific. So remember my example. I'm asking consumers to pay the monthly subscription fees as a way to maybe not save the entire music industry, but at least inject some cash into it so that artists are getting paid a little bit more. Again, it's not going to change the whole world, but at least it's something. But my specific audience is consumers. So who are your specific audiences? I think I know most of yours. So I forget who Quentin's trying to address in his solution, but Taylor's speaking to the animation companies themselves, not fans of animation, not major studios necessarily, I don't think, but the animation companies. Montana, I think, is probably addressing more up-and-coming artists, right? The people who have to face these decisions about what to do, where to go, who to sign with. So be aware of your audience. Okay, last step, APA Revisited, the one section we haven't covered, in-text citations. Remember, I've been breaking down APA week to week. So back in week 2, I just showed you how to do an APA style reference because that's all you needed to complete the brief, right? You found your piece of evidence and then you provided the APA reference for that piece of evidence. Last week, I walked people through in real time how to set up the essay in terms of margins, in terms of paragraphing, in terms of creating the header. And if you followed along in real time, you're in pretty good shape because you should already have the template set up so that you can just hit the ground running and actually start writing your essay. If you need refreshers, go back and watch, especially last week's session, because I thought that was pretty useful. because you got to see me not just set up the format, but even I went through the references page again and even created some references in real time. So if you have any confusion about that, watch just that segment. Remember, you can always go back to that activity, the go-to training archives. Click on that week 3 video and just skip ahead to the part where I'm walking students through the steps of how to format the paper. But there is one last piece we need to cover, which is in-text citations. So this covers what you do when you need to either quote something or not even quote something, but just share a fact, share a statistic in the actual text of your essay. When you do that right then and there, you need to cite. Here's the general rules. Again, you can take a screenshot if you want. This is also covered in that website, Project APA Info, that I've been plugging all month. It's also contained in your McGraw-Hill reading. So this information is found in other places. But this is like the dumbed down version. This is like in-text citations for dummies. This is just showing the basics, the very basics. Quick reminder, any quotation, fact, or information that comes from research needs to be cited. Whether you're it just doesn't just apply to when you're quoting something, because that's a confusion that often happens. Sometimes students think, well, if I'm not quoting something, I don't need to cite it. And that's not true. Anything that comes from research needs to be cited. Okay, so first, let's say that you are quoting something directly. There are 2 ways to handle it, and they're both correct, okay? That's something that's a little bit confusing to students sometimes, but you basically have 2 ways of formatting it. Both are fine. I'll show some examples, real examples, to show the different ways to do it. But one way is to find a way to mention the author's name and the year of publication in the beginning of the sentence before the quotation even appears. Okay, so according to Smith, or if you want to use his full name, that's fine too. According to John Smith. If you want to add more details, like according to John Smith 2008 in Time magazine, and then you deliver your quotation. I don't have an actual quotation. I just use the words insert quotation. And at the very end, we create another set of parentheses where we put a page or a paragraph number. Okay, so there's one option. In the beginning of the sentence, mention the author's name, year of publication, and then put a page or paragraph number at the end after the quote. Or you can save everything for the end. Author's last name, year of publication, page or paragraph number. So you have 2 options, right? And I'll try to give some examples in just a second by looking at an actual essay, but a lot of times it has to do with, you'll just intuitively figure things out. For example, if I go back to my introduction paragraph, hold on. Okay, there's my introduction paragraph, right? Here, I chose the solution of saving everything until the end. Jefferson, 2011, paragraph 1. By the way, this is a real citation. I got this information about Lady Gaga from an online article written by a guy named Jefferson. Okay? Because this is the opening line of the introduction, it would probably be pretty awkward to do it like this. Right? It would be really awkward for me to say, according to Jefferson, 2011, pop star Lady Gaga was paid $167 for 1 million plays of her 2008 hit Poker Face via Spotify, right? I mean, I could technically do it like this. Let me blow that up. Right? This is correct. Technically correct. I've mentioned the author's name early in the sentence. I've put the year of publication in parentheses, and then I just save a page or paragraph number for the very end. But that's a really awkward way to begin my essay, according to Jefferson, right? So that's why I chose the other option, which I'm going to get back to. Okay? That looks like this. So you'll just have to sort of intuitively figure out which method works better for you, but both are acceptable, okay? 2 different solutions. Now, why do I say page or paragraph number? Because sometimes, depending on where your information is coming from, it might not have page numbers. Lots of times, information that you find online, it may not have separate pages, right? It might be just a single article that's on a page that you scroll down to keep reading. In that case, in order to locate where the quotation or the information comes from, we just put a paragraph number, and it's abbreviated like this. But if it does come from a traditional source, like most of the stuff you find from the LA Film School library database, probably was originally printed in an article and it has page numbers. So in that case, we put a page number. Now, what if you're not quoting something directly? The same rules apply, okay? So let's imagine that this line here, American students are underperforming in comparison to their world peers. Let's say that that's entirely my wording, okay? But that information I found from an article. I still need to cite it. And there's another quick rule too. You need to find a way to rephrase things entirely in your own words. Okay, you can't be borrowing short phrases from the sources you've found. You can't be borrowing chunks of text. Anything that's borrowed at all needs to be placed in quotation marks. So you need to find a way to entirely write things in your own words or put quotation marks around things that are borrowed. But let's say that I'm doing this here. Okay, this information I found in a source, but it's entirely in my own words. Same rules. We can put the author's name and a year of publication at the beginning of the sentence and save a page or paragraph number for the end, or we can save everything for the end. How much sense does that make? Are people following along? I know that this is the hardest part to explain in text citations. I think I mentioned this last week, but APA, it's not that difficult. It seems nitpicky, it seems frustrating, but it really is just about finding that example, that model, and imitating it. And that goes for in-text citations as well as the references page. It's just that because you have different ways of handling it, that can cause some confusion. So Quentin says, I'm following, but it's a little confusing. Yeah, let's look at some examples. Or one example. Okay, let's go back to this guy's essay. Okay, so here's a quote. Okay, I'll read a few lines before the quotation appears. Here's a quotation, by the way. Even if violent video games are not allowed in the home, children might be exposed to violent games at friends' houses, arcades, or at big box stores that allow customers to play on test consoles. After all, quote, it's better to rely on parents to impose limits rather than expecting the heavy hand of government to do the job for them. Okay, here he's chosen to save everything for the end. Author's last name, year of publication, and then a page or paragraph number. Because I think this source came from online, he's citing a paragraph number. If there were a page number to cite, he would put a page number. Okay, but he could have done this a completely different way. He could have said according to, and let's put his full name in there, John Rodriguez. And because we're using the author's name in the sentence itself, we're going to put the year of publication right then and there, 2014, and then deliver the quote. But because we've chosen this strategy to put the author's name and year at the beginning of the sentence, here we just need the paragraph number. Okay? Let me highlight that so it stands out a little bit more. So you have two options for doing it. It's just Quentin and others, I would say that I know this is really frustrating because it's hard to explain, but when you're writing your paper, one format or the other will make more sense to you. I would say that lots of times when you're delivering a quote, you'll have to determine how important is it to give credit to the person in the sentence. Does it feel like it's deserving of that weight? Or is it better just to save everything for the end? Okay. And if we keep scrolling down, we get another quote. Okay, the Entertainment Software Rating Board was established in 1994, and according to the president, Patricia Vance, 2005. So here, he thinks it's pretty important to give credit to the person who spoke these words. And I agree. If you're going to mention that you're talking about this software rating board and the president of it, it seems pretty logical that you would give her name and credit right there and then. And then the quote appears, the board quote was created with one central mission. Then we get that mission. And at the very end, we just get the page or paragraph number. Okay. And I'll go ahead and show it now. You also have, by the way, I'm in the 4.4 assignment. It looks a little bit different on your end. I'm looking at it in the instructor view, but you'll see something that looks pretty similar to this. This is the actual assignment for the essay. You get some sample papers. So you get a sample of what's an A level paper, you get a sample of what's like a C level paper, and you get this really useful video. I didn't create this video, another instructor did, but it's pretty fantastic. I would look at these two essays. If you don't want to read it entirely through, at least skim it, because she does make reference to the two essays and explains why the A paper receives the A, why the C paper receives the C. But you can also look at it for examples of what you need to do. So here's the A paper. I already have it open. You can see that it looks like it's in pretty good APA format already, right? The cover page looks correct. Uh, Same thing with page 2. Okay, and you can see how he does his in-text citations. Actually, he's technically missing something. Like he should have a page or paragraph number here. And I believe in that video, the other instructor who created this video, I think she points that out, that there are some tiny issues missing from his APA. But at least you can see how he's integrating quotations naturally. And then you can look at the C-level paper, which is trying to kind of follow APA format, but isn't doing it as well. And there are other issues. It's not just a matter of APA that earned it the grade that it does. But yeah, you have two sample papers to look at, and you have this little video that kind of covers, why one paper received the grade it did versus the other. And let me see if I can quickly bring up Project APA info. Okay, I've been plugging this all month, so don't forget about this either. This also covers in-text citations, as does the relevant chapter from the McGraw-Hill readings. So if you just click on in-text citations, you'll get things like formats of quotation, paraphrase, and summary. Okay, and you'll get even more examples. So you have all the information here, and I know it can seem frustrating, but again, it's really a matter of just finding that example, finding that model, and imitating it. What I want to go over, what I did just go over, is more the rationale behind it, the sort of philosophy behind it, the logic behind it. Quentin says, so your in-text citation should match up exactly with ending paper. You mean like the references page? Is that what you're talking about? Yeah, the two work in tandem. The whole point of an in-text citation is that if I see a name listed here, like Rodriguez 2010, then yeah, I can scroll down to the references page and there will be an entry for Rodriguez. Okay, it's sort of they're pointing to each other, if that makes sense. Like I can go to your references page, go to the article written by Rodriguez, and I can go to paragraph 3 and find the information that you're citing. That's the whole point of it, by the way. It's not really just so much a requirement for this class. It's just a standard to make things as simple as possible, so that if I need to find that information, not just as an instructor, but maybe I find it useful, I can find it quickly. Like I go right to the article, I know it's in paragraph 3, or I know it's on page 42. But yeah, I know it's confusing. But it's less confusing when you actually go through the steps. As soon as you create your first in-text citation, like every other one, I'm snapping my fingers now for emphasis. There we go. Every other one is just going to fall into place. It's that easy. But it's a matter of getting that first one down right and then just kind of repeating it for the others. Okay. And also Project APA info and your McGraw-Hill readings, they cover things like, I'm sorry to keep going back and forth. I know it's confusing, but it covers things like, again, what do you do if there's no date or there's no author? So let's say that's too big. Let's say for my introduction paragraph, what if there was no author for this piece? Let's say the title of the piece was Spotify is destroying the music industry. Okay, but it was completely unauthored, right? There's no author given. What do? Again, Project APA info and your McGraw-Hill readings cover this. You'll take the first 2 or 3 words of the paragraph, of the title, and put it in quotation marks. I just made up that title, by the way, but we'll call it Spotify is destroying. Okay. What if there's no date? Then we use that abbreviation ND for no date. Okay, so also those readings and that Project APA info website, they cover those kind of nitpicky exceptions to the rule. But hopefully you won't run into that too much. By the way, for your online sources, make sure that you're searching for an article, for an author's name, for year of publication. Typically, it's near the top, right? But sometimes it's at the bottom of the article. But make sure that you're scouring completely to make sure that there's truly no author or no date. I'm just trying to get things fixed again. Okay, a couple of things to be careful of. First, I call it photobombing. Do not photobomb your quotations, your facts, your statistics. In other words, do not photobomb research. What do I mean by photobomb? Think of what photobombing is, right? We all know that term, yes? Like photobombing is when someone intentionally or unintentionally disrupts a picture and gets in the way. I like to use that imagery for describing research that just comes out of the blue. Okay, quotations and research need to be set up. Yes, they need to be set up technically, like we were just explaining, according to so and so. But they also need to be set up in the sense that they need to fit within the overall paragraph that you're writing. And there's a simple litmus test that you can use. It's called the sandwich technique. That we make sure that we're leading into the quotation, okay, which is like one slice of bread. We deliver the quotation or research, which is like the meat, or if you're a vegetarian, the cheese or the veggies. And then we follow up the quotation with our own commentary. If we're using the sandwich technique, we're probably doing everything that we need to make sure that it's fitting within the larger paragraph. And you can also use common sense. Make sure that you read over your essay, not just for proofreading, but also for overall rhythm and tone. And you should be able to hear, like when a quotation just gets dropped in out of nowhere, you can tell because it feels like, yeah, it feels like someone photobombing, just as someone might jump in your picture and intrude on the photo. A quotation or a piece of research that's just dropped in out of the blue also has that sort of feel to it. Second, be careful of long quotations that speak entirely for you. Remember, it's occasional use of research that should help to support your points, not the other way around. Plus, quotations over 40 words actually need to be placed in a special format called block format. Again, your McGraw-Hill reading will go over it. Project APA will go over it. Yeah, 10 million rules, right? But most of you probably shouldn't be using quotations that long. It's just a general warning that sometimes students find a passage that's incredibly written, it's skillfully written, the author is just phrasing things in a way that the student feels like she or he could never do, and so they just take the whole thing and drop it into their paper. But that's not really writing. That's just having another person speaking for you. Okay, that's not how research works. That said, if you do find a valuable long quotation that you truly want to work with, that's fine. For example, this student here does this, right? According to Alan Gershenfeld, 2014. And then we get a long quotation, and it's put in block format. Okay, so I'm not saying that you can never use a long quotation, but make sure it's really functioning importantly to your essay. Typically, if you're going to use such a long quotation, it's because you want to deal with it explicitly somehow. You want the reader to digest that long passage because you're then going to comment on it in depth yourself. But yeah, we don't just drop in long passages because they speak for us. And finally, just as I've been plugging all month, projectapa.info. Remember it, use it, jot it down, the address if you haven't already, because this is just a screenshot, but you can tell it covers in-text citations, it covers the references page. All your answers can be found here. So I swear I'm not passing the buck, but there's a certain point where I can't drone on and on and on about APA format. One, because you'd pass out, which I'm guessing some of you have done already. And two, there's just too many rules or too many examples or too many. At a certain point, I try to teach the basics and then point you in the specific locations where you can find more information, more examples. But the gist of it really is kind of simple. Okay, good news. This is, I think I mentioned this last week, but this is by design one of the shorter sessions because I don't really have that much to go over. If you have a solid brief, it's time to take it to the next step and turn it into an essay. Put some importance and some emphasis on the introduction paragraph, making sure that you write a pretty solid one. And then it's just a matter of transforming each of your three reasons into full body paragraphs, right? Which hopefully contain at least a small instance of research in the form of a stat, a fact, a quotation that's properly cited. And again, if you've already done the brief properly, you probably already have those pieces of evidence or research at your fingertips. Questions about anything? I'm trying to think if I forgot anything. Other reminders, keep up with your McGraw-Hill stuff, the modules. There's one more to complete, so don't forget about that. Those are easy points. Don't forget to look at those sample essays, right? The sample A essay, the sample C essay, and watch that video. That woman did a Herculean job putting that together, so take advantage of that. But are there any questions? I know I covered a lot. Yes, no, maybe so. Any questions about introduction? In-text citations, what you need to do. Quiet group tonight. Oh, and don't forget to go over the assignment sheet, okay? I typically skip these because I prefer to go over the bulk of things within the actual go-to session. But don't ignore like the assignment sheet itself. It covers pretty much everything that I just went over. Okay, Montana's good. Listen, I'm not going to trap you here. If you're pretty comfortable with what I went over, you're free to enjoy the rest of your evening. Just message me with any questions. You'll probably have questions at a certain point, either involving APA or your topic or your essay. So feel free to reach out to me. And thanks so much for attending.